to someone who's inspired by the stuff that I'm doing. But anyway, he was like, hey, I can't tell you which school to go to, but he did have his assistant photocopy some scholarships I could apply to. And basically what it boiled down to is like, I managed to, with my grades and, grants and all that, to cover half of my tuition with scholarship money. The other half, I had just took out a lot of debt, a lot of loans, which I know a lot of you know something about, to the point where I think the mandate became where I almost have to make it as a TV writer to be able to justify how much money I'm spending on going. And then, I think the reality hit me, coming out of the program. I loved everything about the training we had at NYU. I found that the most helpful thing actually was, the colleagues like you, Kassia, that like, just people who are in the trenches with you, people, fellow friend and director Pete Chapman. Like, I didn't expect to see another brother at NYU. And when I saw one, it was like, oh, wow, we up in here.
There were 8 of us our year, 8 our year.
I know, and of course we all know each other.
Yeah.
Because I think there was that immediate recognition, like, oh, I see you. Okay. But there were a lot of other people from all over the world that were in the program, and one of the things you learn really quickly is that we all are, don't know what we're doing, and discovering ourselves and discovering what it is that we do best. Some of that you learn in this program, but you don't necessarily have to go to one of these prestigious institutions to learn their craft and to figure out how it is to find your way in. There is no degree that is required. All you need is the talent and the fortitude. And I would say maybe, since the theme of today is a Hollywood panel, I mean, working within the business also requires a little bit of savvy and people skills, being a decent person too. I mean, that's the way I operate. Not everyone in Hollywood operates that way, but I found that, you generally tend to attract the kind of energy you put out. So, if you want to work with good people, then be a good person. And
I love that.
Yeah, but it still took me approximately 15 years from the time I graduated NYU with a dramatic writing degree to the time I got paid to write. And I don't want to suck up all the oxygen here, but I often wonder though, if 35-year-old Theo tapped 21-year-old Theo on the shoulder and was like, yo, homie, it's going to take you like a minute. Do you really want to do this? I would like to think that I would say yes, but, I think that it certainly was one of those things where I had to constantly re-engage and surround myself with people who would prop me up and remind me that this is a marathon and it's not a sprint, and that it sometimes, especially as a storyteller, even takes you years to even have stories to tell, and the craft and ability to execute it.
I mean, just like having gone to school with you and just seeing your dedication then, I always knew that like between you and especially Pete, because Pete was like, we're definitely going to be out there like creating it and doing all of that really great stuff. And actually Maggie Kreisement is in the audience, and she does amazing VFX work, and we've known each other since high school. So, that's like when you're talking about like, that kinship and working very closely and being with other creatives and such. So
that's
now
OG freshman year friend right there for me.
Hey, like freshman year high school friend.
Oh yeah.
So now I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Aurin to answer that question.
I applied to NYU, but I got so little money, and this is, prior to this whole debt explosion. I had an internal feeling like I should not go there because I don't want that level of debt. And they covered like 2/3 of it, and the rest was like, you'll have to make it up. By the way, it feels like I'm freezing, so let me know if it's a problem and I'll turn off my camera. But anyway, so I ended up at Northwestern because they gave me full scholarship or full financial aid, mostly scholarship and some things that were covered. And I went there for journalism. And I've said this in interviews before, I got put in radio, TV, and film by like an error in the computer. Because I really was like passionate about journalism. I wanted to work for like the New Yorker, the New York Times. And then I was told that I should stay in film and just do journalism on the side. So that's what I did. And so I had like one foot in journalism, working for different newspapers, the Daily Northwestern, interviewing people for radio stations, and then one in film and just observing, going where there is the most welcome. And in film, I learned so much. I didn't really grow up in a household where we would watch a lot of movies. I was mostly about reading the newspaper, the encyclopedia, and reading novels. And that was my dream, like write books, write for a newspaper magazine. That's what I wanted to do. But then observing how the film students worked, I realized I wasn't a film geek because obviously I didn't have that background. And number two, there weren't a lot of Black or Latino professors. There weren't a lot of Black or Latino students, and it felt like we were all spread out. So I realized that in order to do film, it takes a lot of teamwork and a lot of people involved. And I just observed from upperclassmen that a lot of Black students didn't have that. They would help out on white student projects, but the favor would almost never be returned. And so in that disbursement, I'm like, I'm going to avoid that trap of wasting my time on someone else's set and then having no one for me. And then what would be the path of least resistance? Well, writing. I could just do that on my own. And so I focused more on that field in the last 2 years at Northwestern in the creative writing and the media program. And I don't need a team of family or a team of anyone or white people or students. I can just do that on my own, apply to contests. And then I fell in love with playwriting. And then so I came to Northwestern. After Northwestern, I came to New York City, and someone said, get an MFA. So I got into New School, and they also had the most financial aid as opposed to NYU, which I also applied to again. I was like, again, no financial aid. When will I learn? But I just applied just to see if it was different. I was like, oh, nope, it's not different.
Nope.
Probably worse.
I went to New School because playwriting felt like if I understood that, I would understand all forms of dramatic writing a little bit better. And I felt like that was more true and didn't require a massive team of people. And so I was very fortunate to have one Black professor at Northwestern, Zainabu Davis, who encouraged people. But we were very spread out. And I could see what was going to happen in a team sport where you don't have teamwork to support you. So I was like, all right, it's just a matter of negotiating. And like Theo said, being savvy, like, and seeing, okay, this is what the road is ahead, and I'm going to avoid these traps and become bitter and angry. I'm just going to avoid all that and just go this direction around these potholes and obstacles that are sometimes my fellow students and sometimes my professors and sometimes just the financial institutions we exist under in the logistics of filmmaking and TV. So it's all sort of together. And I was always told, like, just don't be bitter about it. See what the future holds and try to negotiate these paths. Yeah. And I love theater, got into Juilliard. And then afterwards, I continued to write for like Talking Points Memo, New Republic, do playwriting. But someone suggested, you should consider TV, and playwrights are popular in TV at this moment. And so that's where I started going out to LA for generals and found out that I enjoyed that. And I could see the blend of journalism and research, playwriting and dialogue and world creation of what I used to do as a radio, TV, and film major at Northwestern. And that's sort of the path I took.
Yeah. And since you touched on like your grad school experience and, essentially like television programs in the United States, pretty much all of it, it's written for like white folks as the default. What's it like to write for an audience that's considered the standard while keeping, like Black folks and viewers of other colors in mind?
I mean, I don't really think about the audience that much when I write. Mm-hmm. I think about it maybe more when I finish, but I was always considered an unconventional thinker. So I don't represent standard white people. I don't represent standard Black people. I don't represent standard people. And so that's why I'm always sort of a little bit outside of the scope of what is the norm. and then finding my way back to, I guess, the pleasant, well-defined middle that social media is appealing to. And so that's always my angle. If it's really something that I get at first glance and I can comprehend everything about it, I'm not that drawn in, whether it's a book or movie or a TV show, whatever it is. If it's something I could just got it, there's just nothing that is going to trigger that in me. But if it's something that's well-defined pop art, or what they consider like normcore art, appearingly normal, but has these things underneath, you look at it, you enjoyed it, and the more you go back to it, you find the layers underneath it and the little messages that are going on. And that's when I fell in love. We're at Juilliard and everyone was raving about Breaking Bad and Mad Men, and I'd never seen either one. And so they're like, you have to watch Breaking Bad. So I went home and we had spring break, and I watched all of Breaking Bad over that week. And it was amazing to see a master at work in all the cinematic references within Breaking Bad. That if you notice it, great. If you don't, you can still enjoy the story. And he has this amazing story adventure, and these cinematic references are sort of flowing underneath like an underground river. And it has all these levels working at one time. And that is what excited me. And Better Call Saul, possibly even better than Breaking Bad. And Mad Men I enjoyed for also the same thing. Like, these are people that aren't throwing their grad school education in your face. It's just sort of underneath the surface of a good pop story that anyone can enjoy.
I would say, Aurin, you bring up a good point, because this reminds me of a course I actually took at NYU. It was part of my undergraduate focus in Tisch School of the Arts. It was a class called Image of the Other, and it was taught by this professor, Donald Bogle, who's a published author, who's written, it's a real, deep film historian, and has really sort of chronicled the images of African Americans from the advent of motion picture from like 1890, the first ever motion picture ever made, all the way to like current film and television, and sort of drawing the connection between the stereotypes that were created during American vaudeville and how they had been repurposed and revisited upon us, even in some of our contemporary work. And I think that in a way it made me realize, oh man, I can't even enjoy an Eddie Murphy movie anymore. Like it really got in my head, and I think that as an artist, it almost paralyzed me to the extent that, like, if I'm so concerned about all the terrible ways in which Black men, for example, have been depicted on screen or on film, how am I going to write a character who has flaws? And in a way, I almost had to, unburden myself from all the stuff and thinking about what the audience is thinking, and think about it from in looking out. A good example would be, a show that I'm a writer and executive producer on now, Billions. Like, I don't aspire to be a billionaire. I've never experienced what it's like to be a billionaire. So like, what do I have to say about what it's like to be a billionaire? But then, you take our main character, Bobby Axelrod, who's this guy who, grew up poor in Yonkers and was somebody who had a drunk for a father who beat his mom and abandoned them, and was made to feel very powerless as a child. And everything, all the wealth, all the trappings, all the things that he builds his life around is all about him never wanting to feel powerless again. And that is something that I can identify with. That is a feeling, that is an emotion. And it's from that point of view from which I'll write. Now, whether our audience responds to that or not, it's, I'm not necessarily thinking about race. I'm thinking about character. And that helps me push through at least the cobwebs of the core thing. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm completely writing in a vacuum. I'm certainly aware of who the audience is, who's watching, but I tend to not spend a lot of time thinking about what the audience wants, and think about what will help me tell the best story with these characters.
I mean, I think that I was talking about this to someone a few days ago. We have an advantage as Black artists, as people of color artists, because not only are we aware of code shifting and all the different layers, because it's necessary to work our way through this world, but I feel like you're confronted with these three pillar concepts with you that are implicit in the dominant culture when it comes to Black lives. And at least in my opinion, this was said to me overtly or implied a lot growing up, which is you're stupid, you're ugly, and you're worthless. And so these three pillars are, in my opinion, white supremacy of your life isn't worth anything if you're a person of color, you're not smart, and you're not good looking. You're ugly. You're ugly. You're an ugliness in our society that we want to hide. And what I think what a lot of Black artists do is, and a lot of people, especially in hip hop culture, is you define yourself in opposition to that. So, you know, hip hop culture and sports athletes, they get a lot of money. I'm worth something. Here's how much I'm worth. I'm going to throw this money in your face. You know, I'm smart. Look at all the, like, look at how I'm a hustler. I'm a smart person, and I'm beautiful because I got all this wealth. I got beautiful models around me. I got beautiful things. I'm beautiful. And so even though that is related to white supremacy, everyone can relate to that one of those universal fears, or not all three. Women, people of color, Black people, people who are poor, that feeling of like you're worthless. As society says, if you're a poor white person who grows up in Nebraska, or you're ugly, if you're, you know, an overweight man or female who doesn't fit the body standard, you're stupid because you think differently, or because you might be a genius who doesn't conform like Albert Einstein to the normal views of thinking. And so I think as Black artists, we always have the advantage because we've dealt with those pillars. They're a part of our society. And in order for us to survive, we've had to have an answer to that and a way to transform that so that we just don't become bitter or become beaten down by those. Because at least, I don't know about you guys, I know a lot of colleagues, friends, and family who have been beaten down by that and who served as a warning sign, like, don't do that. That person bought into the idea that they were stupid. Now they're in prison. That person bought into the idea that they were ugly. Now they're messed up their face or something's happened to them. That person bought into the idea that they're worthless and they threw their lives away. And so we have these cautionary tales that we're told as children, like, look out for that, look out for this. And you're sort of navigating your way through this. And it gives you a skill as an artist to relate on a universal level to all people who are usually dealing with some combination of those three main things that heteronormative patriarchal capitalism sort of.
I was just about to get to that.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, you're also you know, besides being Black, you're also a queer person. So being like, you know, all these like layers that are just, you know, a facet in your life. And then like, you know, like how does that affect you in the writer's room in terms of like representation, in terms of like the way that you approach characters? I know that with Theo, who, as far as I know, is not queer, but you did, there was a character on House of Lies, Roscoe, who was honestly, at that time, was one of my favorite characters, and I prefer Roscoe over Tariq any day of the week.
Right, yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know, Tariq is a character in Power, and yes, I do not believe in corporal punishment for children, but Tariq is the one exception. So,
well, I mean, Power is a good place to start. I mean, that certainly is the first professional experience I've had in 20 years where I wasn't the only black male in my department. And this is prior to me working as a writer. And so it was a strange and comforting experience, even though we were, you know, wading in all sorts of tropes that sort of speak to the things that Aurin was just speaking about. But like, you know, I do think that was a professional environment whereby I was able to let down my guard and be able to talk about things that I wouldn't ordinarily necessarily feel that comfortable talking about. And most of the writing rooms I've been in, it's been again, when you're talking about, you know, knowing primarily like why you're at the table in the first place. There was no mystery to me that like on House of Lies, and my boss even said as much. Look, Matthew Carnahan created a show starring Don Cheadle. And he wanted a strong Black male voice in the writer's room. And at the time, there were none. And, he saw my writing, loved it. It wasn't a comedy sample. So the big risk for him, he took to me, he took to my writing. He's like, I just hope he can be funny as well. And took a chance on me. It was my first staffing job. And I was not the only Black writer in the room, though. And I found that, like, there are some who will, because they know why they're in the room, will immediately take it upon themselves to become the resident Black expert, and be the one who will pitch to that often, their ideas, and then inadvertently and reluctantly become pigeonholed as the token Black writer, which is something that I've actually actively worked against. Certainly I'm not going to let some BS just fly by, be like, this character wouldn't say that, or this is not a situation that I feel like, or whatever. And there have been a few times where I've had to speak up, but like, the other part of it is like, I can contribute to all of the characters, not just the Black characters. And so I feel like for me, it's, for especially any new writer in a room, it's intimidating to be at the table, working with these professionals, and especially if you have an internal voice in your head that's saying that, oh, I don't necessarily belong to be here. You almost have to work overtime to squelch that inner critic, and I think it's almost like you're fighting against the fear of being a token, by basically proving that you have the ability and the talent and all the other reasons to be at the table like anybody else. And maybe this is one of those things. It reminds me of a joke in Chris Rock's stand-up where he talks about the wealthy neighborhood in New Jersey he lived in at the time. And he's like, I'm one of the most successful Black comedians in the country. One of my neighbors is one of the most successful athletes. Another black man. The other neighbor is a dentist, white guy. Not the best dentist, just a regular old ass dentist. You know what I mean? And I do think there is a little bit of that, like, that thing where we find ourselves having to overcompensate just to be playing at the same skill level as just the average dude. But in some ways I feel like that's the burden of being the other in the room.
In some ways it can transform, especially if you're on a new show. The first job I had was Brain Dead, a political satire. And that's because I wrote like a few political satirical plays. And so we were trying to cast an egghead scientist, and I was explaining certain concepts of technology and theories of quantum physics. And they started looking at the casting. They started looking at Black people to cast. And I assumed, because it was a white showrunner, because I was like, oh, and the guy's name was Gustav, that he was going to be cast as a white person because it's Gustav. And so I was looking at the cast and I'm like, okay, yeah, this white guy is good. Haley Joel Osment did a good job. I was like, yeah, he's good, And they're like, well, what about this guy, Johnny Ray Gill? I was like, oh, okay, yeah, you can do that. And maybe in some way, us being in the room, when it comes time to casting and we show our full selves, when it comes time to casting a quantum physics scientist, they go, oh, Johnny Ray could do that. And then he excelled at that. He was phenomenal. And then when it came to casting the Black doctor he's working with, and my sister's a doctor, and I would ask her questions and say, my sister said, blah, blah, blah. Then they cast Nikki James as a Black doctor. And this was race neutral. And these people kind of had white names, by the way, as characters. Race neutral, but the influence of us being in the room sort of like, oh yeah, this person can be Black, this person. And on This Is Us, it was me and Kay Oyegan as a Black writers. And we would have these funny conversations, and the dynamic of a black man and a black woman. And then they're like, oh, let's explore Randall and Beth more. And maybe in some way that opened up to the white showrunner, like, oh, this is fascinating what's going on here. Because we would have arguments of like funny arguments between us across the table about certain things. He's like, that's Randall and Beth, you know, and give her more lines. Let's explore her family. Maybe in some way, I believe that we can use that tokenization or whatever it is to be like, also I know about the tulip crisis, and then they have a tulip expert in the show as a biracial guy with dreadlocks, whoever. They go like, yeah, whatever, because Theo's in the room and he knows about tulips. Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that. Yeah,
in the middle of the country's watching Billions with the tulip expert who has dreadlocks, and they go like, oh, okay, and no one draws any attention to it. They're just talking as a tulip expert, and some person, black or white, American, goes, that is right. You can't be a tulip expert and be any guy with dreadlocks.
Yeah, that's true.
Love
like
that because you know, not I think it's like a universal thing because and even in cannabis, like I'm always, you know, telling folks that you don't always have to hire a black person to be the you know, human resources expert or to be the diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. Like we're capable of being scientists, lawyers, you know, people who are in your corner offices, board members and such. You do not have to put us in a specific box because of the color of our skin or what you perceive to be our experiences, because even if we have something that is unique to like the Black experience or Black culture, we live, you know, as I believe, Aurin, you said earlier, in these like, you know, many worlds, you know, while living in one world at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, no, you could truly be an advocate just by showing up and being yourself. And you know, in some ways, I think in a writer's room, you're often rewarded for being someone who plays well with others. And what I mean by that in terms of the savviness, a writer's room is typically like you would imagine it would be. You're sitting around a conference room table for upwards to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And, you know, that means you're bringing all of yourself in there. That means, you know, your hygiene habits, you know, whether you're somebody who doodles when you're sitting and thinking, all the good and bad and otherwise. And typically speaking, the people who get invited to come back into that environment are people who keep the ball up in the air. In other words, people who like, you're not shutting down ideas unless it's something that, you know, you're truly like, I think that's repugnant, but how about this? You know, you're constantly, you know, as you know, to put in other words, you're not shitting on the fun train. You know, they want to play with you. And that's not a skill that necessarily comes naturally to a lot of writers. I mean, most of us are introverts and misanthropes. And so therefore, you know, to work in television, it might require you to work against your nature in that respect. But understanding that is part of what will, I think, guide you and, you know, and creating more opportunities in television if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, I think what you said is just like really valuable because a lot of people, and I'm definitely like, I mean, some of you may see my, I won't say they're rants, but I'm very passionate about certain things, especially, you know, more so in recent years. But I've also like learned to be like a bit more understanding, not necessarily like just teach everyone all the ropes, but like offering like that gentle guidance, or even kind of like, you know, where you said like not really killing, not being the fun police and not killing it, but like making those suggestions that, you know, makes things a bit more equitable for all folks who are involved.
Right.
Yeah.
See. All right. And forgive me because both of my eyes have decided that they're not going to work so well today.
I feel bad that I didn't wear my glasses. I feel like, you know, I already got the glasses memo. I didn't wear mine, but like, trust me, I have them. I'm just not wearing them at the moment.
And then in terms of developing characters, what's your process been like?
Usually room, we go through a list of attributes and traits. For me, if it's a play or a movie, or I'm doing something fresh from New School, I learned the Meisner graph technique. So they would make writers stand up and do dramatic Meisner improv, where we would create a scenario, then we go through the scenario, and in your head, you had to be aware of what your character must do, which is different from what your character wants. I could want to be the Queen of England, but what must I do? Like, do I really, is this a must or is it just a want? Because a more charismatic character, it's not a want or whimsy or something that they dream. It's something that they will die without getting, or something that they desperately need, whether it's $5 or to become, the NFL champion. Then I'll go to actions. You have one must do, but you have multiple actions that are your toolkit to get that one thing. You have emotions, previous circumstances, stakes, obstacles, unity of opposites. What do I need from you that you're not willing to give? Vice versa. What do you need from me that I'm not willing to give? And then we would just go start. And so if I was driving the scene, I'd be like, I would be the one that would have the primary must. And then I would explain the scenario to that person. And then they would have a secondary must that they wanted. And we sort of dance around until we engage like wrestlers, or just a simple knock, knock at the door, let me in. What are all the different tactics you use to get in the door? You're screaming, then you're like, come on, baby, I love you. To like, I have $20. They're like, I swear, but like, what are all the different tactics you do? Because you have to get to the other side of the door, because you have your rare stamp collection that you found out is worth $1 million. And your girlfriend or your boyfriend's not letting you in. Your must do is I have to get this effing door. And so like, we would just do that repeatedly, so that now, I think years later, a lot of times that map is sort of in my head. And when something isn't working, I go back to the map like, oh, they don't have an obstacle, or the stakes aren't high enough, or they don't have an interesting previous circumstance, or their must do isn't strong enough. And whenever I've sat in movies or TV shows or plays that aren't working for me, I like the map goes in my head and I begin filling out the boxes. And if I can't fill out 2 or 3 boxes, if I can't fill out 3 boxes for a character, that's usually becomes a problem. Or when I'm like, this character isn't working, and I was like, I don't know their obstacles, I don't care about their stakes, and their actions are repetitive for this thing. And I'm grateful for Laura Maria Centabella, Jim Ryan, and that whole system that was taught to me that allows me to, like, from new, come up with something and like begin tweaking it by making it almost like a math graph and going through it and then putting it together, putting it on its feet.
That's such a good point. I feel like one of the things that I was so happy about when I got into art school and discovered that I didn't have to take any math or science courses is how much of what we do is ultimately math. Structure is math for certain. And when it comes to like the question you asked about character, I think what Aurin points out is something that every writer who wants to write for film, television, or the stage is that one should take at least one, if not more, acting courses, because you are writing for performance, and it's all about character. It's all about, in many ways, the unsolvable character conflict of need and want, and how they are at odds with each other. Because often the thing that you want is not the thing that you need, and thereby, and some of the best things you'll see that in the main character. Like from there is where you build the story, because every character in the orbit of the main character is either in service of or in conflict to those needs and wants.
I'm looking at the note that you dropped in the comments, Aurin. Yeah, the writers and directors taking acting classes. I'm not sure if you remember, Theo, but did you take acting classes?
Yes, I did.
Yes, so I definitely remember those. And they were incredibly helpful with like the work that we were crafting, kind of like getting into that mindset. And somehow I still find myself using sense memory today.
Oh, for sure. And it also certainly makes you sympathetic to and responsive to performers when you're having to work with them, because that's another thing that's very different about a television writer versus a film writer. In features, oftentimes you're paid to write a script, you deliver it, and then they're like, bye-bye, it's director's domain. They hire 5 other writers who then come on and rewrite you. And then if it makes it to the big screen, oftentimes you may not even recognize the thing that you originally turned in. Whereas in television, you're involved in every stage of the process, like casting, as we mentioned earlier, but also if you're a producer, as we are, and you're on set, when you're doing the on-set rehearsals and the star of the show, number one on the call sheet, comes over to you and says, hey, so I'm trying to understand what this line is about. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to be able to understand the character's motivation to be able to explain to the actor why you had them say that line, or else you might have a problem in terms of you're the star of the show being like, yeah, I don't want to say this. And sometimes you're in a situation where as an on-set producer, you may even have to make revisions on set because, a thing that may have seemed great at 2 a.m. when you were writing the scene on its feet actually doesn't really quite work, or feels awkward, or doesn't quite, seems counter to the intention of the scene. And you're able to address it because, someone who's approaching it from character is like, well, what about this? Or what, or once upon a time, my character did this. And maybe, at the time you're like, oh, I didn't even really consider drawing from that experience in this moment. And that's one of the things that makes, I think, being a writer in television fun, is that you really are so, depending on the show, certainly, but, and most of the shows I've gotten a chance to work on have really been involved in the process from conception to completion.
And now that we are actually on that topic, I wanted to ask the both of you, how did you become producers? Was it something that you intended to do along the way, like a natural progression? Or was it just a matter of like, hey, I want to try this thing out? Or someone said, you know what, I think that in addition to writing, you would be good at. So, Aurin, if you want to go ahead and start.
Well, when you get promoted in TV, if you keep going, eventually you're a producer. So you start off at staff writer, then story editor, executive story editor, co-producer, producer, supervising producer at either consulting or co-EP. So I was fortunate to have some continuity and just working my way up and studying more senior writers above me. But even before television, I was asked to rewrite a project that was a web thing. And I came in and I had my ideas and like, well, why don't you just write it from scratch? And I was like, all right, if this is for a dating app. And they're like, also, do you know any producers? And I was like, I'll do it. Now, I never produced anything before, but I figured like, well, I'll come up with a spreadsheet and I'll just Google the answers, I'll hire a director. And I became a writer producer. This is like a few years before Juilliard, as well as an overlap that helped me pay for a lot of stuff for Learn Liberty, Mr. a gay dating app, and then a few other clients where I would come in as a producer, present my idea, go away and write it, hire the director, cast it, and I would just do everything. And that was sort of my training on the fly. When I realized you could sort of just call yourself a producer and begin producing if you're a responsible person that knows how to organize a party. You can be a producer. Like, what is my budget? Who's coming? Where are we going? What's the setting? And I'm like, all right, who do I hire? And then I'd be like, and we'd have meetings, and I was like, I'm a producer. No one really taught me, and I was getting paid a good amount of money by like corporations to write and produce these videos, some of which turned out very well. And a lot of that is who you hire as a producer. So I'd make sure I check out the director. I'd be like, who's the DP? I would check out like, okay, now it's all about casting and how they work with actors. It's sort of you're behind the scenes calibrating different things. But if you hire the right people, which I was fortunate in getting them, especially at the editor, then that is a lot of the producing job, at least when I was doing it in an indie fashion.
Or wouldn't you say that like being a producer is perhaps the least understood and most often abused term in our business? Because there are a lot of people who will self-assign themselves as producers and don't actually do any producing work. What I would say that's very different about being a writer, which naturally lends itself in some aspects of producing, is that because you're spending so much attention to detail about what's happening in a scene, you often have in your mind a sense of what kind of clothing these characters from this world and this place will be wearing, or what music you're listening to when you're writing the scene, or all these sort of things, so that in the sense, once you get to a prep stage, you have something to contribute in the conversations where you have all the different department heads sitting around a table being like, okay, well, this is the looks that we have for this. You know, you might be like, yeah, I don't think that they would wear this. This is somebody from, you know, Martha's Vineyard who went to Brown University and grew up in a rich neighborhood in Connecticut. They'd be wearing this, not this, or vice versa. You know what I mean? And I think that, you know, while that doesn't necessarily come natural to some, and I think that there was certainly a learning curve. And as you mentioned, you know, you hope to have mentors in the business so that, like, you learn, you know, when to speak up and when not to in production meetings, for example. But, you know, these are all skills that I think, you know, in some ways, there's a lot of what a writer does that lends yourself to being able to contribute to producing.
And
the Pixar method, become a producer, fail fast, keep failing, keep like, and learning from those failures, rather than, I think for a long time I was scared of doing that. But then when the money was on the line and the job was there, I was like, sure, I'll do it. Okay. I shouldn't just accept the power, like you said, Theo, and not understand the responsibilities. So then really quickly, you know, sort of guerrilla producing 101, you learn cobbling things together. But I think if you're a fairly responsible writer who knows how to gather people, you probably will be a fairly good producer who has some idea of a vision, because, you know, that's most of what you're doing as a writer, and are able to recognize talented people and bring them together.
And
keep
yeah. Shouldn't everybody, I mean, I imagine that everyone here who aspires to write and produce are writing and producing their own stuff. I mean, I feel like most of us have really cut our teeth, whether we went to a program or not, that way, because that really is sort of where you cut your teeth, you know, where you're like feeding your crew Subway sandwiches because that's all you could afford for your crafty budget or whatever, you know, like you learn real quick what are some of the rewards and pitfalls of producing when you're doing, you know, when you're doing it yourself.
And in terms of like that progression, obviously Aurin pretty much just took things into his own hands. But with you, Theo, was it, because I know that like you've been mentioning like having mentors and so on, was it like a mentor who was just like, you know, you'd be like a really good fit, or was it just like that matter of like working your way up?
I found myself incredibly fortunate in terms of you know, I've certainly had mentors along the way, including a playwright from my hometown in Albany, Georgia, who was a guy who, you know, produced his own work, cast my mother in his work in the local theater, but was terrified of going to New York and trying to do it that way. And so had my encouragement. I got his feedback and his honest, raw, like commentary on my work when I was really young. But in Hollywood, the way I landed on House of Lies was truly one of those Hollywood stories. Like, I had come out here, November 4th of 2008 was my first full day in LA. And many of us know what we were doing that day. I early voted in Tennessee. I was on a couch in Studio City as I watched the election results come in. My cousins, some originally from Chicago, were in Grant Park screaming. And I thought to myself, wow, okay, we just elected the first Black president of the US. If this can happen, I can sell a damn script. You know, in my mind, it was sort of a good omen for starting something new. But I had no idea what I was doing. I really was kind of starting over. I quit a news reporting job, and probably the economy was like the worst time to be looking for work. But I did the things you're supposed to do. I got an assistant job working for production executives. I submitted material and got into writing programs. I was networking. I was doing all the things that people say that you should do if you're a young writer trying to break into Hollywood. And none of those things, by the way, while all helpful in many ways, directly led to my first writing opportunity. My first writing opportunity happened in a bar on a Friday night in Santa Monica. I was out with some friends. I was talking to a guy who happened to be a writer's assistant on House of Lies. And in true LA parlance, this happens all the time. You'll know if you live here or ever move out here that suddenly somebody becomes immediately more interesting when you find out that they have an industry job. So in my head, I was like, oh, like this guy was kind of boring and annoying, but now that he works on this cool Don Cheadle show, he's slightly less annoying. But anyway, we were talking and, about work. And at a certain point, he got a phone call because he was friends with Matthew Carnahan. Said, "Oh, I had to step away," and I assumed it was work related. I mean, it's not uncommon to be getting a work phone call at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. And lo and behold, 15 minutes later, he's standing next to this guy who's in ripped jeans and a leather jacket, and bleach blonde hair. It looks like an extra from Sons of Anarchy. It doesn't seem like a guy who created a show about management consultants, but lo and behold, Matthew Carnahan was standing there with him in the bar. They were friends from New York, working in the theater scene. And I immediately knew the situation was bound to be awkward, mainly for him, because I felt like you could probably just smell the desperation evaporating from me, like that hungry wanted to be in. But, I checked myself and I was like, look, dude, it's a Friday night. You're in a bar. Just be a normal person and acted accordingly. And we started talking about, New York and the theater. And it turns out like we had that in common. I mean, I knew who he was, so it wasn't like I was going into the situation blindly. But something happened after 15 minutes of chatting that rarely happens in a situation like this. Matthew asked to see some more writing. And at the time, I thought this was probably just a really graceful way for him to like bow out of this conversation. but I didn't know for certain, and decided to take him up on the gracious offer. And it was sort of a sliding door moment because, I treated the situation like one where I was cognizant of his relationship with the guy who I met originally. So I got his contact information from that guy, not. I didn't do the awkward getting his contact info in the bar. Maybe a couple hours later after sending him a script, Matthew responded back, was like, "Oh, this is great. I could totally see you, working on a show like Homeland." And I'm like, "Yeah, I could see myself working on a show like that too." Yeah, well, because I sent him a 1-hour drama that was set in Baghdad. So it was definitely dealing with, international relationships and this, that, and the other. And it wasn't a sample that was designed for House of Lies. But again, the point in case there, it's like, you always lead with whatever your best writing sample is, not trying to write for the marketplace. Because I know a lot of writers will be like, okay, well, I want to write a comedy. I want to write a horror. I want to write no, write the thing that you want to write, that you really write well. And let that be the thing that leads you into opportunities, because people will respond to good work, well, especially fellow writers. And that's another thing that's different about television, is that writers are the ones who hire other writers. There's a misconception that the first thing you need to do is get a manager or an agent. In this situation, I had neither. He reached out. He said, "I like your work." I stayed in touch with him. When I had a new writing sample, I reached out and was like, "Hey, I wrote a new script. I don't know if you're interested in reading." At a later point, I said, "Hey, I know we talked about staffing, but if anyone who's looking for writer's assistants or script coordinators, I'd be love to be considered." So it was like maybe 7 months from the time I met him in the bar to the time I got this 2-sentence email, "Hey, how would you like to come to House of Lies? I think I can make something happen." By the way, I had no idea what exactly he was asking for, but I was like, "Sure, let me know what you need." Right. At this point, I'd been working as a Hollywood assistant for 3.5 years and was ready to pull my hair out, and felt like I was treading water. Didn't feel like I was making the progress I wanted to make. And by the end of the day, he was like, yeah, well, welcome to House of Lies. You know, the room's already started. Let me know when you can start. If you don't have an agent or manager, don't worry about it. We'll hook you up. And literally, I went from not having reps to having within 48 hours, 8 reps call me. I mean, that's truly the best, you know, like people ask, how do you find an agent in this town? Like, it's obnoxious to say this, but it's answer your phone when they call, because they're always chasing for money. And the reason why that happened, it had nothing to do with my writing samples. Some of these agents, by the way, had read the same sample. Yeah. But the thing that was different was that I was hired on a show, which means that one of their clients didn't get onto the show. And by the way, oh, who is this Theo Travers? I've never heard of him. Oh, he's probably not repped. We could make money off of him. And that's the story right there, you know? So I think finding a mentor is not, you know, it is in some ways serendipity. You know, I'm very, very fortunate to have met Matthew and connected on a friendship level, on a creative level. And you know, and I feel like the other mentors that I've, you know, been lucky enough to connect with since that time have been similar situations where we've met and we've connected on some personal level, and seen each other's humanity, seen seen each other's and responded to each other's work, and built a friendship that way.
And that goes back to what you said in the beginning about like just basically showing up. And I know that the word authentic gets thrown around a lot, but I think when people, like maybe one of the words that they would use to describe you is like authentic and honest and very real, you know? And so you brought that when you met him and, you know, channel that energy into like something extremely positive, versus when people kind of like try to do a little bit too much instead of like, you know, showing their, you know, their telling instead of like showing their work, and you did that, you know.
Well, I would say it's curated real, right? Because like I said, the internal monologue in my head is a situation where you're like, yo, I'm standing next to a showrunner, like I just need to impress them because I really want this job. Because internally that's what you might be thinking as a writer, but outwardly it's more like, look, how would I feel if the roles were reversed? And I'm, you know, like right now, like I go to a bar, you know, I'm hanging out with some friends. You know, do I want somebody that's sweating all over me and trying to like tap dance and tell me that they want to be a writer, or if it's just like I meet somebody, we start talking about comic books, and we're just like vibing and nerding out, and like are laughing and having a good time. Like that's somebody who I'm like, yo, oh, you're a writer? Oh, cool. Like hit me up with something. Like I'd love to see what you know. If we truly had a real connection. I'm just naturally going to be intrigued and want to see what this person is about. And I also know from the interaction we had, oh, I can sit in a room with this guy for 8 hours or this woman, you know what I mean? And like, again, that's an aspect of what we're doing that plays into like, so I would say, yeah, be authentic, be yourself, but like also, it's also about self-awareness and being able to read the room, read a situation, and be able to pick up on other people's energy and see what energy they're putting out. Because I think that to a large extent can impact how someone responds to you. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you could tell by somebody's energy, like they want somebody who has a lot of enthusiasm. Sometimes just by the way their body's responding, like they might just be tired. You know, they just got off a 7-hour flight. You know, maybe you don't want to hit them with a whole lot of stuff. Maybe you just want to be like, oh, hey, you know, keep it low energy. I don't know. But like, I think that, you know, it's important to be able to pick up on those social cues.
Yes, definitely. And just because we are approaching that like 15-minute mark, although like if you have like that time to go over a teeny bit, but I kind of wanted to go back a little bit to, I guess, a part of your foundation in journalism. Has that been helpful, especially when you think about like the researching portion with what it is that you do as a writer or producer? And we're going to lead off with Aurin.
Yeah, at New School, an actor studio, one of the first exercises we had to do was go out and record a conversation without people knowing and then transcribe it as a play. And that was easy for me because all 4 years at Northwestern, my work study job was working in the Northwestern radio actuary, interviewing, transcribing interviews for radio for AP and UPI wires. So like that was like, oh, and you notice when you're transcribing someone verbatim on the street, their dialogue pops and explodes off the page because each person, the way they speak in their syntax is like a fingerprint. It's wholly unique. The pauses, the ums, the way they reverse things around in the sentence structure instinctively. And you just label one and label the other. And we'd read them as plays, and they were amazing plays as far as dialogue. And it was one conversation was just two students talking about class that I recorded, but it sounded like two mafia members because they're like, did you do that thing? That blah, yeah, I did that thing with the blah, blah, blah. And it was like, who is this Aurin? I was like, it was just students talking who just couldn't find their words. And they were both from like New Jersey, Buffalo, and they talk about things in a certain way. But the conversation about class came alive through the dialogue. And I think as a journalist, having that background in radio, as well as like as a reporter, you start noticing the dialogue sometimes can be the jumping off point for a character. I talked about the Meisner graph, but sometimes a character will spring almost fully formed to life out of just words, out of a phrase. It'll just like spread on the page like ink, and all of a sudden will start taking shape, and you discover all these things. And I think having that journalistic ear is so helpful, or the ear of a radio guy is so helpful when you are searching for that phrase that launches your character, or you're searching for that thing or that or whatever the scenario is if you can't find the action. So yeah, if everyone could be a journalist, I think a lot of the creative writing would be so much better. And also, you know about deadlines as a journalist. There's no such thing as writer's block when you're a journalist. It's like, so when I went to Northwestern and grad school and afterwards, sometimes writers would talk about writer's block, and I was like, what are you talking about? You just write, like, but that's the journalist in me is like, there's no such thing. You put words on a page, hello, 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 until something comes along, because you're not really allowed that excuse in journalism training. You just have a deadline, and if it's bad, it's bad, but at least you have a beginning starting point.
Yeah, one of the first stories I covered as a journalist in my hometown of Albany, Georgia, was this complicated federal redistricting case. And I had a lot of catching up to do. I had to go in there and cover this case. I had to be able to explain it to an audience. And by the way, I only had 1:40 to 2 minutes tops to be able to tell the story along with the sound bites. So one of the things you learn in journalism is not just how do you get caught up on a lot of information to where you're informed enough to be able to ask questions in a very short amount of time, but you also learn a lot about the economy of storytelling, which is that ultimately you've got to be able to whittle it down to the thing that is the essence of this story. And in so many ways, that's what you have to do with a screenplay, whether it's, you have a limited amount of pages and, scene work is typically, a page and a half. And I think you also learn too that story, no matter what format you're working in, hasn't really changed much in the last 5,000 years. It's about someone, like whatever the issue is, who is impacted the most. You're telling that story. What is the problem that they have? And what are potentially the solutions to that problem? And that's all down to its essence.
Especially newspaper, at least in basic tech class and undergrad, newspaper writing is that first paragraph, that first sentence and paragraph is the most important thing. And so we spend a lot of time about, like, when you're reading a basic newspaper, how do you hit audience members with that first paragraph? And then it's like an upside down pyramid. The information goes like this, and then you usually end on like a note or something, a denouement, some sort of fading thing. But most newspaper stories are shaped like a pyramid. You read a New Yorker article, it's shaped more like this. It begins someplace, it expands out to its most important part because it's a different structure. So when you're looking at TV and film, are you beginning with that newspaper style, which is the Breaking Bad moment? the pilot of Breaking Bad is like a newspaper. It's like, bang, we are in the middle of it. You're like, oh my God. And then it sort of goes like this. Or are you beginning in a more casual Mad Men, like long form New Yorker essay, where we're going to get around to the thing by the end of this pilot, but we're really going to luxuriate in the style and class of the setup. You know, if you had the end, if you wrote Mad Men like Breaking Bad, you had that surprise at the end of the pilot at the beginning, it feels completely different as a narrative, as opposed to, and it's just a matter of, like you said, matching those narrative structures of journalism for what we watch on TV and film. And usually things either begin with a bang or they begin like in some sort of graphic shape of exploding out at a point and then coming back down.
So I want to ask just probably two more questions before we give the audience, if there's anyone who wants to ask any questions themselves. So, although several people here are in the industry, so I feel kind of silly asking this question, but we're going to be playing out some sound bites for folks and for our budding filmmakers, because basically, although not everyone who has shown at Black X is necessarily like unseasoned, but lots of our folks are first-time filmmakers or first-time, documentarians and such. So what advice, and I know like you've been asked this probably a bunch of times, do you have for anyone who wants to break into television, whether, as a writer or producer?
Well, I often will, I do a lot of mentoring. And one of the things I often find when, especially someone who's younger and still trying to find their voice, is identifying the thing that you're most excited about. And, because I do think that there's, it is a team effort, and, and there are a lot of different jobs in television. And, I would say that like, being a line producer can be just as fulfilling a career as being a writer. It just sort of depends on what it is that is your skill set and your strength. Certainly for anyone who knows for sure that they want to work in television, I often will tell them, and Aurin, you may disagree with me since you're Brooklyn based. I have to say that the first thing you need to do is move to LA. And the only reason I say that is because a vast majority of the writers' rooms are in Los Angeles. The vast majority of the producers and people who hire writers are here. And in many ways, that encounter that I described to you that happened at Finn McCool's, where I bumped into a showrunner, that more often happens in Los Angeles as well, because it's a company town. That may not work for everyone, right? Like, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a successful career doing this. And, this panel is a perfect example of that. But it is a path that I took, and probably among the advice I would give people if they were looking to break in as a television writer.
I think you need to, number one, as Theo said, write what you're most passionate about. And one of my former colleagues, Joey Hartstone, went to USC or UCLA, and everyone told the students, just don't write political dramas. No one wants to buy that. Joey Hartstone loves politics. So, of course, his first two screenplays are political dramas. And guess who gets sold first as a writer? His two screenplays, not only sold, made into movies. His first two screenplays, and that was the thing people said not to do. But he was like, I really love political dramas. I'm obsessed with politics. So I'm going to write this. On the flip side of that, I've had a lot of friends who, like you said, write here's my drama, here's my comedy, and you read them, but anyone could have written them.
Yeah.
Like 500 other writers could have written a standard police drama. And so you read it and it sort of washes over you. And it's competent, it's well-researched, but there isn't anything that necessarily pops. And making people understand that, like, it isn't about showing your competence, because when you're a young writer, people are searching for a voice. They're not searching for a young writer to explain structure to them, because they have higher level writers who know how to do that. If you're getting hired as a staff writer, They like you because of your voice and because of a particular angle or thing you're taking, and you will learn the structure stuff in a room later on. You will learn all those things, and there are writers who are more experienced with that. On the New York, LA question, yeah, there are more opportunities in LA. But I would say, since TV is like the end process, the most mechanized, unionized process that you're going to be involved in as an artist, is television and film. If you're starting off, you want to get at the root of whatever that thing is that you're obsessed about. So for me, it was journalism and playwriting because it was the word. For someone else, I was going to school with, she really wanted to do stuff. She was passionate with costume design. And I said, well, the best way to do that is to get involved with operas. So this happened within a year. She applied for an opera. She got in, she started designing costumes for an opera because operas have elaborate costumes. That led to one job that led to another, and eventually the Met. So now she's designing these elaborate costumes for the Met, then gets hired for film, then gets hired for TV. But she didn't start off thinking, I'm going to go to TV and film. She was like, what is the root of this craft? And I was like, opera is the fanciest. What is the root of your passion as a producer? Is it radio? Is it NPR producing sound? Like whatever that thing is, and you hone that and you can work your way up. Because then when someone's doing Sofia Coppola's new picture about 17th century, blah, 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 you're like, yeah, I do this, but I also have an opera background as a costume designer. Right. And that pops so much more. And they go, yeah, I write, I have a few samples, but I also have a background as a journalist. And you go, oh, yeah, I'm a producer, but I also have a background as a concert promoter, whatever the thing is. They go, oh, okay. And like discover what that root is of what you're passionate about. And then I feel like if you are a competent person who knows how to connect, you can work your way up while your skill is developing so that when you meet someone like Theo did in a bar, you have a craft that you've been honing, that you can present when the opportunity is there, and it just naturally flows from that, rather than a lot of people I've met, we hit up and we start talking, they're working backwards. They're like, well, I have an idea of something, or I wrote a script, and you read the script and it feels like they just want to be hired rather than they have something to say.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's a good point. Like I often will, neglect to mention that when I made the move to Los Angeles, I was 31. So this was after I had worked for years as a journalist throughout the Southeast, most recently in Memphis, Tennessee. And when I started out as a journalist, I was shooting my own stories. I was editing them. I was writing to a deadline every single day. I had an opportunity to interview people like Barack Obama, John Lewis, and, just iconic people and just regular folks and everyone in between. And I think that I really sort of learned a lot about myself, especially returning to the Southeast, where I was raised as an adult, because you really do need a point of view. You need to know what it is that, the context of yourself in relation to the world that you live in, to be able to tell stories that reflect that. And then I also think that there was to an extent, like, I feel like before you move to LA, go do something else. It's kind of what Aurin is saying, which is true, because not only will you have really honed and developed your voice and your craft, but you also then have something interesting to talk about when you're in the situation where you're at a bar, and it's not just, hey, I just graduated school and now I'm trying to look for work. It's like, no, I just spent a year undercover with, police on drug bust or whatever, whatever that thing is. Like suddenly, you immediately, speak from a place of like, yeah, no, I have a story to tell. And I have life experience that backs it up.
And then finding those areas, like for you, it was in the South. For me, I was waiting in a theater. There was a Black woman who was an usher. She also was a playwright. This is like 10, 15 years ago. And I was like, what are you writing? She's like, oh, I write political stuff. It's like, where do you submit it? She goes, I only submit in London because no one likes Black political stuff in America. That went in my head and went down. Years pass, and I'm writing Black political dramas. And I'm like, let's submit it to London. Let's see what happens. They immediately produce it. The same stuff that I've been sending out to American theaters that were like, nah, we'd rather do the standard, couple thing, gets produced. And another play gets produced in London, and 3 plays get produced, because not only is it within the field of writing, it's like London likes this better. This Austin might like horror films better. LA might like this better. New York might like this particular genre better. So finding those areas, if you're writing within a genre of like, this is the region, these are the people who actually are really passionate about this. And that led to going to Royal Court Theatre. And then that first job, Brain Dead, was a political satire that I just came back from London and was watching the first season of Black Mirror. And I walk in with all this London political theater on me, and drama and all these things is political. All started with a tiny seed talking to an usher in a theater while waiting for a play to begin years ago, and just having a casual conversation about what do Black artists do to get seen in America, when most of the time they don't want to see you unless it's slavery or civil rights stories or torture porn stories, excuse me.
How have you avoided things like that? Because I know in the last couple of years, there's definitely been a lot of shifts in terms of like viewers, Black viewers, not wanting to see more of that. Because I know even most recently with them, and you don't have to incriminate yourself if you know anyone who worked on them, but that was really like at a point where I think a lot of people, they saw like the success that Jordan Peele had, and then they come with them and they expected that, Black audiences would really gravitate towards it. And then I just saw this flurry of chatter that was just like, I absolutely do not want to see that. And then like, around the time with like 12 Years a Slave and a couple of other things that came after it. And most recently, I think was Antebellum. There was a lot of backlash from Black folks with regards to like those particular items. Like, how do you, I know that, especially with Aurin, you said that you don't write for like what is supposed to be the standard, and then you also write what it is that you feel versus simply writing for audiences. So how do you go about that? Whoops. Okay, you're back.
I think that for the whole slavery thing, I had a reaction to that. This is years and years ago, which was very negative, because a lot of Black culture is filtered through what white people think Black people want. So in order to be a Black artist, you have to have this triple consciousness, because you have to be aware of what you want, and you have to be aware of what people around you want, but then you have to be aware of what white people want, and then what white people think Black people want. And then you're sort of working your way, as opposed to if you're just a white artist, you could just say, this is what I want. And this is what the culture wants. This is who I am.
It's quadruple awareness, actually.
Yeah. And so you're working your way through, how do I get through white filters that think they know what Black people want? And there is some overlap to that. And it has to be somewhat aware, and you can play against the stereotypes of what white people think they want. You could tweak it. You could do a whole Twilight Zone thing where you present the genre of what they want and then have the real thing underneath that. But unfortunately, if you are an artist of color or woman, you usually are going to have to work through those different filters of like, how do I get through this? Or you do your own thing. But if you do your own thing, you have to worry about the last part, which is distribution. How do you actually get people to see it? Because there are amazing Black filmmakers who have written, produced, finished, completed, and the work is sitting on a YouTube channel no one's watching. So I would say, like, how are you working your way through these multiple filters to get noticed without falling to the trap of just delivering what white liberals think Black people want and then getting that backlash? And it's a dance. It's a constant dance. You have to be a very nimble, fleet-footed mind and person if you're an artist of color, because you are sort of dipping through these multiple variants that maybe your white colleagues don't have to do. And so, going abroad helps, because then those white people don't know. They just know, like, you're Black. Whatever you say is goes. You're like, well, this is what I want. They go, we love it, And so there's a reason why a lot of Black artists go to London and Paris and travel to other countries to find their voice without having to worry about the white American filter, and then come back to America after they've gotten some established creed or some white other people saying that they're good. And that's unfortunately what a lot of people have to do. That's why a lot of Black British actors are hired over Black American actors to play Black American roles, because it's the white casting people deciding that they actually want that barrier between Blackness, and having that sort of extra layer makes them feel more comfortable. Anyway, that's a whole other side thing.
Yes, that's definitely a whole other conversation. And I mean, maybe even after we have the film festival, because that's a pretty important conversation to have. But just in the interest of time, because I know that our tech officer has to go soon. Let's see. And I'm happy that you touched on mentorship, Theo, because a lot of people, and I feel that also, I mean, for me, when I was going into NYU, that's one thing that I didn't know a lot about, was like how for many people it can be very important to have a mentor and to have folks. Like for a little bit of time, Dean Antonio was kind of my mentor just a bit, inadvertently. Actually, I mean, I feel that I kind of played myself, because senior year, she comes to me and she's like, do you want to go to grad school? And I had a really rough time in film school for multiple reasons. And I was like, yeah, but she's like, you can go to grad school for free. And I was just like, I need to leave. I need to get out of here.
Okay.
Really?
So I did blow that, but it was also just like, the thing is, I've been working in film since I was like 14, 15, like production side, actually with Maggie. So I had a bit of a head start, and it was just kind of like burnt out. What I should have said was, you know what, let me do this thing for a year, then I'm going to come back and do this. But that's beside the point, because I tell stories in other ways. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to ask these 2 audience questions that we have so far. The first one is, what would you recommend to someone who doesn't have access to a traditional education, who wants to become a writer?
Well, I would say that the single easiest and hardest part about writing is the actual writing, is the actual sitting down and doing the work. Again, I would say that in the era we have now, if you're someone who has access to the internet, and I realize that not everyone does, there are a lot of resources that you can find online that you don't have to spend money on, where people are talking about their craft. There's podcasts. There's one in particular that I listen to called Script Notes, moderated by John August and Craig Mazin, who are both working writers, where they talk about all aspects of the craft. And there are resources online. If you Google, there's tons of scripts available, because that's another thing. I think, like, forget what writers like me are saying. You want to learn how to write a script, read a screenplay, and because even that in and of itself is an education in terms of what the format looks like on page, and comparing the script to a movie to watching it on screen and actually reading it while you're watching. There's a lot that you can do without the formal program. Now, I think that once you have completed a script, getting that script in someone's hands who can help you make it is a trickier thing. I think oftentimes, given that we're in an era where, every single one of our phones have HD cameras on them, like there's very little in the way of you actually being able to produce the stuff that you write. So I often say, like, look, I mean, we've seen, how many people in the last year go from obscurity to TikTok fame? Like, everybody has the ability to shoot at it right now. And so with, if you could get over those technological barriers, meaning like if you have a phone, if you have access to the internet, if you have a computer and can, with even just a word processor, Microsoft Word even, you have everything you need to be a writer and to be a filmmaker.
Yeah, it's like you bringing up TikTok. I actually was on TikTok a couple of days ago, and there was an Asian American woman who was basically like, I think maybe a year ago, she was working fast food, and then flash forward to this year, she I can't remember if she was like writing or doing something similar to that, and it was just like, you know, that's brilliant, but it's also like, also like kind of brings in like how technology can like help influence things like that. So many of these people have also gotten their start like via like TikTok and Vine and things like that, and it's like helped them to like be able to like shoot into the stratosphere. While he's not the best actor, but sometimes he's kind of funny. I mean, King Bach, who started off on Vine, like, and that was not me trying to shade him. I'm just
well, no, I mean, but it's kind
of a lot of comedians I watch on Instagram who are now getting a start, and I made little videos on YouTube with my roommates. None of them went viral, but the exercise of it was so helpful, of just making the videos, trying to craft jokes in short form. And I had a roommate who was an actress and another roommate who was an illustrator. So guess what we did? We started doing a cartoon. In addition to that, I would write it. She like whatever you have around you. If the person would have been an opera singer, maybe would have been doing that. But I was like, you're an illustrator. I can write some stuff, translate that into Spanish. Let's pop that on a comic book, and then let's make little short sketches out of this, because those are my roommates. So you look at who's around you, go like, let's just have fun and do something. It might take the form of an experimental TikTok. It might become viral, successful on Instagram, or it might just be practice. I would also say masterclass, the Shonda Rhimes masterclass. Really just watch that. You could save $200,000 in a TV if you watch the Shonda Rhimes masterclass, and she gives you the scripts from Grey's Anatomy and Scandal. You watch them, she breaks them down point by point. And you're like, oh my God, this is 2 years of film school condensed into one. And just go through the master classes. It's $99 a year. If you save yourself from taking out a loan. And then in addition to script notes, Screenwriting Life podcast, in addition to script notes, is another one I listen to. This is information that's just out there for free or not a lot of money, because artists are so giving and technology is so invasive that the artists like, well, podcast, blah, or it's masterclass, blah. And it's just all there. And you can organize your own curriculum around those tools, and then just make little short form things as experiments.
Yeah. You know what? We cast someone on season 5 of Billions, from Eva Victor, from the short comedy videos that she was making, where she's literally shooting herself doing, comedy bits, and built a following. And because she had an audience, that's how our showrunners discovered her, because they were like, oh, here's this woman who's got, I don't know how many followers, and by the way, her shit is funny.
Okay. And our second question and last question, because I want to make sure that we get you out pretty soon, is for those looking for a mentor, what is your advice for connecting with someone in the business? And we'll let the mentor master take it away first.
Well, I would say that, oftentimes the most direct approach, is sometimes helpful. Like I said, I wrote a letter to John Singleton. I had no real expectation that he would respond, but he did, and I would say that it didn't end up being a fruitful mentorship necessarily. Like, I didn't form a relationship with him, but I did many, many years later, when I got repped by the same agency that he was at. I met him at an event, and, got the chance to thank him and be like, look, dude, like, you're the reason why I'm standing in this room right now, because like just a small gesture of you responding back gave me a little bit of confirmation that like I was stepping in the right direction, and, and it was encouraging, and, I had a chance to thank him. But, I think the other thing too is that, oftentimes when you go to, film programs, I think that like whatever college you went to, I find that like most colleges and universities have alumni associations that will connect you with fellow alum that are in the business. I mean, that's certainly how I've connected with one of my most recent mentors is someone who just recently graduated from NYU, lives in Atlanta, and, you know, is trying to find his way into the world, has worked in production quite a bit, still trying to figure out what his next steps are. And my role as a mentor is really not to like try to hook him up with jobs, or really just be like, hey, you know, what's the thing that you're really good at? What's the thing that you want to do? What are ways in which you might allocate your resources? Because again, there's so many different avenues, and no one path is going to be perfect for everyone. And so, you know, I think the key of when mentors is really finding who are the people who are doing exactly the thing that you want to be doing. Find a way to get in their orbit. Find a way to go work for their company, or intern for them. You know, I find that like, you know, there's nothing wrong with going directly to the source, and get rejected. Like Aurin said, like it's okay to fail. But yeah, but you know, try that. I mean, you'll certainly along the way meet someone who's, you know, who is willing to, you know, even if the person that you're trying to contact or reach wasn't available to you, but maybe somebody in their orbit who is, you know, sees your talent and, you know, wants to take the time to bring you under their wings. Like you just never know.
It can be that you can go directly, or like Theo said, you find someone adjacent to that person. So I know a writer who loves Sofia Coppola. Sofia Coppola gets a lot of emails. She was in the office. Sofia Coppola's designer was there. So she went at the designer like, I love this and this. She knew actually what the designer did. And then the designer was like, oh, they engaged in a conversation. The designer is the one that passed her to Sofia Coppola. And then they had this relationship. Then Sofia Coppola read the stuff, was like, oh, this is good. And then they began a relationship where Sofia Coppola took someone, but the person was like, I'm not going to go directly at Sofia Coppola. The people who are most often, who don't have fans, are designers, DPs, production people who don't have fans. And they work for very high-end people. And if you go up to a DP of Martin Scorsese, and it's like, I loved The Irishman and blah, 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 that DP is probably like, no one comes up to me and never ever fucking talks to me. Thank you. You act like a normal person. That is one way to get in. In Hollywood, they have a great organization, Hollywood Assistants. There are a few Hollywood Assistants organizations. And I went to one and it was great. And afterwards, like, 2 people hit me up, and I was like, yeah, just email me. And we had a back and forth. I will say this though, because I'm Buddhist, and one of the biggest things in Buddhism is guru yoga. Guru yoga is how do you find a teacher, how do you get a teacher to teach you, and then how do you get them to stay? And it's something as Westerners we do not do at all. We do not respect teachers. We are like, teach me. We don't offer them any gifts. We don't take note of what they're doing. We don't follow them. We just run up in people and be like, help me out. And if you are talking about real guru yoga, it's like wooing someone. What would you do if you're trying to woo someone? You wouldn't be like, date me, marry me. Like there's a process to getting a mentor, just like a teacher. We have been done a disservice because since we were 6, we've just been thrown teachers in front of us until we're 18. Then we go to college. We don't have to search for them. We don't have to look for them. And then when we graduate college, we're like, oh shit, how am I going to get ahead? The only way you learn something in Buddhism is through having a teacher. The only way you learn something true in life is through having a teacher. And the problem is most of the time when we finish paying for a teacher in an institution, we just stop. And then when we go looking for a mentor, we're like, help me out. You know, it's kind of like, ew, gross. Like, flower, an apple, something. Can you just mention anything you've seen in my work and like, rather than just help me, you know? And the people who do that explode. It's so easy to get ahead because most Americans don't do that. We're very self-centered when it comes to looking for mentors. We don't offer anything to them. You know, Screenwriting Life People is run by an emerging writer who runs their podcast. So maybe he met them and was like, I will help run your podcast. They're like, great, we will help. Like, what are you bringing to the table? Like, What are you bringing to the table besides just, a helping hand? And then so few people do that in America. So few people know how to be respectful, how to follow up. That was the other thing. I talked to these people and then we exchanged emails and no one followed up. And teaching for me and mentoring for me is a burden. It's free work. So if you don't follow up, I'm like, whew, that's a free job I don't have to do. So if you finally have someone who's mentoring you for free and taking hours at a time for free, and then you don't follow up, to me, I'm like, I'm off the hook. Woo, bye. And then you follow up 2 years later, like, hey, what are you up to? Because you want something. Then that shows me you weren't really serious about mentorship. You were just there to get something. But finding the person you want, as Theo and Casey said, the people you like, the style you like, wooing them, being persistent, and sometimes you get rejected, being persuasive, talking to them like a normal person, like Theo said, showing that you know their work, showing that you came prepared, and then offering, hey, I'll do your podcast, or can I blah, 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 or can I help out with this, or can I sweep your office? Then someone goes, you're a person who wants something and is passionate and is willing to give. And then doors open for you. But I've seen so many people just run around New York and LA like, help me out. And it's kind of
hook me up.
It's a coin toss, because a lot of times people go like, I don't have time. This is free work. You know how many emails I get asking for me to do free work in addition to the multiple jobs I have? And the person hasn't really read my stuff. They just give a general like, I love your shows. They want a job. They're not concerned about craft. They're not concerned about artistic integrity. They have nothing to offer. They just want for me to put them in my backpack and drag them around to places and then throw them at Steven Spielberg, because of course I know him, of course, and then throw them at Shonda Rhimes and be like, hire this person because they asked me to present them to you. That's not the way the world works. And so we need to learn guru yoga. You can look it up, learn how to woo your teacher, learn how to keep them once you woo them, learn how to follow up with them, and then show, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm learning. Hey, this is what I took from our last conversation. That is what woos a teacher after you've given them the apple. What keeps them around is you show you're actually listening and learning and growing from them. And they go, oh, it isn't just going in one ear and out the other like my kids do, or like my spouse does. Oh, you incorporated that note. That is so attractive and alluring. And it's a mistake I made as a young person going to LA, that I didn't follow up with the few people that did actually give their free time. Chad Hodge spent hours talking to me, and I didn't follow up because I was self-centered, and I was like, well, I don't want to work on any of his immediate shows. I was so narrow focused. I didn't see this is a person who is giving enough. They give their time for free, and they're talented, and they're going to work on other shows, Aurin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy that you actually brought up being Buddhist. I was going to ask about how that, how you incorporate that into the work that you do. Because we're Facebook friends, I read a lot of your posts where you talk about Buddhism, where you talk about follow through. And for a second, when I initially reached out to you about this, all these things happened. I had to go to LA, this, that, and the other. And then I was like, remembered your post about follow through. And I was like, I need to go ahead and follow up with Aurin, because I do not want to miss this opportunity. And, reading all the things that you say and taking that to heart. And I feel that everything that you've just said about kind of wooing a teacher and, getting that experience, even if it's not necessarily what you want immediately, that in and of itself is a masterclass. That little section, we may end up cutting it and just putting it out there as such.
Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. Clean my freaking car, and you could become a karate master. And what does this have to do with being karate master? Wax on, wax off, bitch. Just do it. And the person's okay.
Yes. And then in terms of mentorship, I mean, I just think as a whole, and especially I think for lots of Black folks and maybe Latino and Indigenous people, we are not necessarily, especially depending on what generation you are with regards to maybe entering secondary education, but there are lots of things that we're not taught. Like, I know that maybe not being taught like how to search for mentors, or not being necessarily taught that like college is great for learning, but it's also a really important place to network, you know? So how can we impart those messages and actions on, you know, younger Black and Brown people?
Job training program. I mean, I've gotten jobs just on writing an appropriate cover letter email. And the person, I would come into a room and the person said, you were the only one that wrote a responsible business professional email. Greetings, my name is Aurin Squire. I'm interested in this position. I am blah, 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 blah. Like nothing fancy, very simple. Here is my resume, and I would love to talk to you sometime. Here's my number. He was like, people email me like, how much I'm getting paid? Signed, sincerely. When the job start? Like, he was like, you were the only freaking person who wrote an appropriate, decent business-like email. And I got through. I applied for a job writing about Jewish history. And my mom was like, how are you going to get a job in New York City writing a multimedia piece about Jewish history? And I was like, watch. And I just, I cranked out this email. I said, here's my background. They responded in an hour. Over thousands of Jewish writers in New York City who probably applied. I'm going to craft this freaking email to break through that surface of just being professional and knowing how, like, and it really is job training and like learning, like, here's how you answer a phone. Here's how you write the email so that it sticks out. Right. Here's how you follow up on a meeting and say, it was so nice to meet you. I am doing this with my life. I'm not just asking you for stuff. I was a finalist in the HBO competition. I was a semifinalist. Here you go. If I read that, I go, this is great. Keep it up. And I put you in my mind. I remember you.
That's so funny. Hearing you say this, Aurin, it actually like brings to mind this idea, you know, when I was speaking earlier about hindsight bias, how sometimes when we look back, we recraft our own personal narratives that tell the version of the eventual outcome. But the truth of it is, like, there's so much of this as built into the 14 years it took me to break through, and that, like, these are all things I had to learn. You know, I had to learn how to write a business letter. I had to learn how to, how not to waste an opportunity when someone shares their information. Like, I remember once meeting this big Hollywood casting director who was in my hometown casting for, a big movie. And at the time I was like, oh, I'm going to be going to NYU. Did I stay in touch with that casting director? No, because I was 17 and I was stupid and I didn't know that this was something that you should do. And I've experienced the same thing too, where there are people who have connected with me who I'm like, either I hired as an intern. I'm like, stay in touch with me, and only a few have taken me up on that offer. And many of those people are friends that I've seen their careers blossom right alongside mine.
I've gotten people, agents and managers in staff writing jobs from my mid-level position because they followed up and they were on my mind when a showrunner at a bar was like, do you know any blah, blah, blah? And I was like, this person. And then I go on about my business. I don't know. And then 6 months later, one of them was like, you got me hired on the staff writing job. I'm like, oh, because she had an email that reminded me, hey, I'm in LA and I'm doing bang, 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 bang. And I let it wash over me and it trickled into my subconscious and it went down the Plinko ball subconscious. You're sitting there, you're like, yeah, I know Janet, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you're remembering. It starts trickling back up, like, and she has a semifinalist in this comment. Like, how the fuck am I remembering this stuff? And like, it like trickles down and you go like this. And someone's like, how do I get a manager? But this person's talented. And I like her as a person. And I was like, here's the way you craft this email to this particular manager. Because I know this manager. And she's been trying for 2 years. And then she's like, I have a manager now. And I'm like, yes. And, the only thing I ask is that, you pay it forward at one point in your life, in your career, that you help someone, a POC who also is like you coming up. Yeah. But it wasn't like I was being Mother Teresa. She was just in my mind. She was around in my mind. And then she had a question in a casual conversation. And I was like, oh, this is the way this manager wants to be talked to.
Right.
There was a contest that was with the director, and I was like, you are a writer. You have to write this like a director wants to direct this. Visually, you have to explain visually how this is going to look. And another very close friend didn't even bother asking me to read his application. The distant friend got it because they annoyed me that I gave them this advice. And I was like, write this cover letter and explanation like you're writing to a visual director and get them excited about your story. And they got the $10,000. They got the grant. They got the award because he knew who his audience was, because he asked me, because I won the award the previous year. The reason I got the National Black Theater I Am Soul thing is because I ran into Infanisa Adofia and we talked, and she was the first winner of it. And I was like, so what was your experience like? Who's the person? And I crafted my letter and response according to what she said. And I was the second person to win it. So like, these are people who are winning awards, who are there, who will be like, this is who's in charge. Bobby likes this. He likes letters written like this, and he likes this particular thing. And 99% of people don't know that. Information in Hollywood as well as in theater is gold. It is more valuable than a job, because if you have information and you know how to use it, you can go anywhere in life.
And this is awesome and so great. And we're going to unfortunately have to wrap it up. But thank you both so much for being here with us tonight, for the brilliant work that you've been doing over the years, and just for being yourselves. Thank you so much to my colleagues at Black X, and thank you so much to the audience members, folks who showed up, for being here tonight. We hope that we will see you at the festival on September 17th to the 19th. Theo and Aurin, I'll be following up with you in the event that, you may want to speak at the festival or anything like that. Again, thank you all so much. Have a brilliant night.
I run a monthly writers group. You can email my assistant if you want to join the writers group, and we go over, and we have a guest every month. This next month, it'll be Tracy Scott Wilson, co-EP of The Americans, and a whole bunch of other things. And we'll interview her, and then we go into people's scripts.
That is amazing. Is that something that we can share with the Black X audience externally, or is it just within this conversation?
How many people? I mean, is it like 1,000? You can, yeah, I guess we could try it out.
Well,
most people
our newsletter. How about that? Can we put it in our newsletter?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good night, all.
Thank you.
All right. Get off this. See you later.